Welcome to Nameless Debate Radio, where radioactivity is contagious. You can join us in broadening our minds on the Nameless Debates Discord via the link below and even feature here yourself, if you've got what it takes.
Why are you called Midnight?
It's a layered joke. I'm awake at midnight, and it relates to my favorite color. The PFP is a night, so on. All right, it's a layered thing.
So it's
How
like
about
a
you, InSync?
that's a what would you say? What do you call it when you put it's like a contraction where you remove things from the middle. Hey, it's not quite a contraction.
Yeah, it's like when you can't.
Yeah.
Like CAN.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not quite like that. I don't know what to call it. Basically, the first three letters are the first three letters of my. So I have this philosophical idea called true name. And so the first three letters, INS, are the first three letters of my first name with regards to my true name. And then the second three letters are the first three letters of my second name with regards to my true name.
Okay, yeah. I have no idea what to call it, but I can understand like what it is.
So
my name's like really basic. I'm just Nathan Thomas.
Well, actually, the fact that it's InSync is a coincidence. I didn't mean for that to be the case. I just came up with the true name, and then my partner noticed one day that if I put the 2-3 letters together, I got this really cool like little tag. So
fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. No, so my name is like a layered joke. It's actually a pretty lame story. So I think the first instance of me using Midnight was that I had a crush all the way back in high school. She had this kind of awesome green on MSN. Back then, MSN was a thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I found this blue, which I thought went well with it. And it was the color code for it was a Crayola dark midnight blue. So I started using the word Midnight as a internet handle in my gaming stuff on the side. Then over time, it just became a layered joke. Like it just add layers of meaning to it. I didn't exist beforehand, but I just layer in new things. So I used to spell midnight properly. I added the K because I just did. It looks like the word night.
Well, I like it better with the K, honestly.
Yeah, gives it a bit of flavor.
Yeah, got that.
To be fair, I don't
double entendre.
To be like thing. When I'm arguing people, I get annoyed and I get heated. I don't actually think you're an idiot.
Yeah, me as well. I was a bit of a jerk. My apologies.
I just disagree. That's just how I function. I don't actually.
Yeah, that's fine, man.
You're still one of the most eloquent people I've chatted to.
I appreciate that. You did really well yourself. Plus, you've got so much patience, man. Most of the people I argue with get the shits with me pretty quickly.
No, you're fine. I've dealt with way worse. I mean, you've met Dart Dawkins, right?
Yeah, dude. I have like several videos debating him.
Damn it.
Guy's a fucking cringe.
I can't. He's way too much for me. I'm just like, I'm not doing this. Bye. I think we got caught up on he uses a transcendental argument for the existence of God. And he kept asserting things that I just wouldn't agree to. Like he's like the laws of logic are eternal. I'm like, there. Not really. Despite what I said to you, I don't think. One of the troubles you're gonna have debating against me, and it's like a warning to everyone. It's like no one's fault. It's just my own. I still don't have a fixed epistemology and metaphysics, allowing a kind of flexibility. Because you have chaos from the outset, you're gonna get chaotic arguments. The other second thing I love to do is I iterate my arguments continuously.
Mm-hmm.
You're literally not arguing the same point with me like 30 minutes later. And that's because I'm not really trying to win. I'm trying to just refine what I'm saying. So I learned stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I'll definitely talk to you about, I'm happy to talk about what I mean by my worldview anyway. For me, right, like the kind of initial point for all of us is experience. We don't even know what of experience is actually real. We just have experience, right? I think from there on, kind of conjecture things about it. Like we say, I have this experience and it appears a real world exists. And then I have this experience and it appears that other entities like me exist and they have minds and they have psychologies, biology, and there's chemistry, physics. We start conjecturing all these things about it. But they're all just conjecture. The only thing that's kind of known to us is, I think there's like a category of things that are actually true and known to us. Like, so if I say, I feel pain, that statement there, I feel pain, is actually a true thing. You actually do feel like you are reporting a true thing, right? So if I say, I think the sky is blue, that will be true if I do think the sky is blue, right? It doesn't even require the sky to exist or for the sky to be blue. It's just that I think there is sky, there is blue.
Where true corresponds to what you believe to be the case.
Yeah, well, true is like this true justified belief. It actually would be true, justified, and a belief. Like this kind of meta commentary that human beings do.
For you, but for most people, their beliefs are relatively poorly justified. Like in a technical sense, most people have beliefs. Sure. And that's what they hold to be true.
Yeah, sure. Like, so if you say, I feel pain, and you're being honest, like honesty is important here, right? Then you'd actually be reporting something that's true, right? Because it's just, you're being honest, and for once, we actually are an authority, but are an authority, whether you feel pain, yeah? So it'll be true, and it'll be justified, and it'll be a belief, all at once. So that's the source of truth. But beyond that, I'm like, skepticism kicks in for me, like Cartesian type skepticism. I think gets cut down, and we don't know what's true or false. So we're left with a whole bunch of conjectures. Sometimes you have like multiple conjectures about the same thing. Right? Like I could have 5 different theories of why rocks fall to the earth. Then when that occurs, I pick the theory that's most pragmatic, in the kind of philosophical sense, not the everyday sense. But that's what I'm kind of doing. So I'm just saying, this human experience, I'm trying to explain it, I'm trying to cope with it, and call it a form of coping. I'm just trying to cope with experience. So I make theories about it. Some of my theories are better than other theories, and I just pick the better theories. But at no point in time, but the whole thing is like wrapped in this intense skepticism, because none of it's actually like true. Beyond this point of saying that like I feel a way, that's true.
Oh my god, Midnight, you're debating Matt.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Oh my god, Midnight, bro! I've been wanting to watch this debate for a very long time.
We had a heated debate, but I think I get the weird feeling we're maybe doing better right now. It takes a while for me to learn how.
I think Matt, in terms of the way he debates, is very good, but then he can be very condescending without realizing.
That's okay. I do the exact same thing. This is fine.
I don't know if it's without realizing.
No, at times it can be without realizing, because you said, "How am I?"
No, dude, I totally realize it. I'm just memeing you when I say how.
It's all good. It's all good. Like I will be happily condescending. I actually will hit the.
No, but every time I've discussed with Midnight, for example, I think he's a lot more respectful in terms of what he says compared to Matt. Like Matt, you're just downright rude.
I don't mind. I'm having fun.
That's cool, dude. I don't mind being called rude.
What's the debate about? I'm asking.
Right now I'm just describing my little worldview thing, which would have been interesting to you too, since you have a different one. But yeah, so that's the way I build it, right? And so some of its bases are things that I feel like are undeniable. I don't think there's anyone who can deny that, say, statements like "I feel pain," they're true. When you're honest. You're honest.
So here's the question then. Right, you would probably accept the Cogito, right?
I think therefore I am. I feel like that one's a bit of a weird statement. I'm not sure what to do with it.
What? You take I feel pain, but I feel pain has the I.
Yeah, so I didn't actually say whether I exist. It's like a little bit of a sidestep.
No, but the problem, I don't know, the I, in my opinion, when you say I and then you attach an active word, the existential predicate is implicit, right? Like, unless there is an I, then the statement cannot be the case.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I feel uneasy about it sometimes because I'm aware that when you say I think therefore I am, you've already asserted that you are right at the start. The first use of I in that sentence is the assertion that you exist.
I mean, I assume I would hope that you know the full version of the argument.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the debate about using the term I, expressing pain?
We were debating on whether death penalty is justified-ish thing.
Oh, death penalty?
Drifted.
Okay, so I think
I would say mostly we debated what truth was.
Yeah,
that was the most interesting part of the debate.
Okay, So,
Personally,
can I ask you a question? What's both your opinions on the death penalty? So, Midnight and NSYNC, what's your positions?
I'm kind of for it, but in a very limited way. Like, it's not as exciting.
He's pro in exceptional circumstances. I am. I'm against it, but I'd probably be pro in exceptional circumstances as well.
Okay. I think it depends. Like, okay, so in terms of death penalty, there are so many things that need to be considered and put into consideration for it.
Yes.
We need to look at the severity of the crime, the upbringing of the individual. Like, there's so many things that go into it, because sometimes it's not actually the individual's fault for committing the murder in the first place. And so if it's not murder, like, I don't know, let's just say it's rape or something. I don't know, pedophilia.
This is like Muhammad, isn't it? It's not his fault.
Yeah. So I do believe it's individual's fault to an extent.
No, I know, but I'm just saying, like, when it comes to like Muhammad doing any of this stuff, that's not his fault, hey.
What did the Prophet Muhammad, peace and mercy upon him, do?
I mean, he married a 9-year-old.
Let's go to that one for a
that's
second.
Actually correct.
Cool, but
yeah, you're right. He married her when she was 7. You're right.
No. He didn't really. Can you present to me?
I mean, he did.
Can we not?
That's actually extremely incorrect. One minute. I just like to clarify. That's extremely incorrect. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and mercy be upon him, was engaged to Aisha anhu when she was 6 years old. They married her.
Okay, so it was 6. You caught me, dude.
No. Engaged. There's a difference. In Arab culture at that time, it was fine, and he did not get married.
I don't give a shit, dude.
Okay. At the age of 12.
When were they betrothed?
Wait, can I finish my statement instead of you interrupting constantly? You made a statement.
I'm sorry,
I'm to disprove you. Let me explain, because you're very ignorant. So let me tell you this. So at the age of 12, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and mercy be upon him, married her, and then did not have intercourse with her until she was the age of 18, as reported in Al-Bukhari, Al-Muslim, and Al-Tirmidhi, and in Abu Dawud. And the Shias will say something else, but I'm not getting into it.
Man.
The Sunni position is what I have just said.
Hey, you know what I really missed in my life, Tanzil? You preaching to me.
I'm not preaching.
Yeah, you fucking are, dude.
I'm not. You just made a statement. I'm
explaining to you why
wrong. I'm explaining to you why your statement's wrong.
Yeah, by preaching.
I'm not preaching.
I mean, okay.
I'm not preaching, though. Like, can you not differentiate what debating and explaining and what preaching is?
Dude, I don't think you can differentiate between the two.
No, I can't differentiate. That's the difference between me and you.
Oh, that's right. Because obviously at 16 years old, you know everything about the world.
When did I say I know everything about the world? That's, again, like another assumption.
I know. Well, in fact, specifically what that is called is a straw man.
You love to assume everything. You assume many things, Matt.
In fact, you could...
Really shit.
In fact, you would be justified in saying it was a double whammy, because it was technically a straw man and an ad hoc in one.
A double whammy. Explain what that expression means.
Oh my god. No,
I don't know what that expression means.
Anyway, what were we talking about, Midnight?
Right, death penalty. You're asking me some kind of...
Oh, that's right. Tanzil started going on about the death penalty.
It's boring. Ultimately, I think I would... Now I think about it, it's not really the most... What? I'm trying to think what exciting stance I have. Oh, I'm capitalist? No, you're capitalist as well. Damn it! Yeah. That's normally exciting.
Fucking
I'm so used to I'm so used to someone having something to say about it. How do you feel about UBI? Do you have opinions on that?
I mean, it seems like a good idea. I don't know how to go in practice.
Damn it. I was trying to develop, and sometimes I develop arguments for the fun, which makes me a sophist perhaps, but it's fun.
Maybe a performative sophist.
Yeah, maybe. I was thinking, if you were a socialist, right? It seems to me, I was just thinking about the kind of consequences. Maybe you'd want to oppose universal healthcare and we call universal education, because what they do, and you see this in Marx's writing. I don't like the guy, but you see it in his writing. An input to a capitalist, if you're trying to exploit other people, you gotta think about the things that make those people valuable. Two things are good health and education, right? Now, if you're a capitalist, the best kind of winning is when everyone in the society chooses to pay to ensure the good health and education of your workers.
Well, are
This
you talking about
makes
UBI?
no universal education and healthcare, which is I think
Okay.
far more generally accepted by people. So I'm purposely trying to see.
Oh yeah, I support universal healthcare at the very least.
Most people do, but you probably have a different mind. Like you're probably not upset that it's helping capitalists. So
What?
but
Right.
Capitalism is bullshit. To be honest, it will never work.
Right, as
beautiful.
Midnight, as the filthy moderate, or whatever dem sock, it's not like to me, like, because the point is that I mean, I'm someone that doesn't not want to market, right?
Doesn't not want. I love it.
Doesn't like
yeah,
I want to market. I want the excesses curbed, because there are excesses with it. Such a system within to its extreme can be incredibly detrimental. I mean, you guys aren't ANCAPs, right? You already acknowledge this.
Yeah.
So you've already taken not a same position. We just draw the line in a different spot as to what's perhaps detrimental.
Yeah, I'm just playing the ideas, right? So
is by yeah, I guess the point is because ultimately it's not about, because ultimately, like, the question of the market just doesn't come into this for me. Like, it's about limiting half of society. Like, even if it does support capitalism, that is an accidental effect as opposed to an intended effect.
I wonder about that. So that's something I can actually kind of play with. I think it might be semi-intentional. So what happens is we socialize, and this is a trend, like you see it in society. We often socialize the negative externalities of business. So take pollution. We socialize that cost. Take education, socialized. Healthcare is socialized, and it's actually really fast. You actually see this. Not in Australia, but in America. There are companies that will work their staff to the point of physical and mental exhaustion, the burden of which is socialized. And same goes to education. A lot of industries right now are dropping out the most the most mindless tasks because they can be automated away. As the most mindless tasks to drop out, right? You're needing to have a more knowledgeable labor force. The great news here is that cost can be socialized, so it never appears as a negative influence on your revenue. It doesn't appear at all, right? You continue to make the same revenue because even though you're polluting, you're leveraging superior education, paying them, and you're leveraging the fact that you don't need to really.
Yeah, as I said, I don't disacknowledge it does benefit them, but the point is that, like, the reasons we're advocating for these things aren't to benefit them. We're not like, well, this benefits capitalism. Like, it's a tangential effect. Midnight.
Yeah, so Midnight, I'd actually agree with Julius on the situation. So I think from what I understand, you have a problem with you have basically a problem with the idea of free medical health care because it's helping with capitalism. Is that correct?
No, I'm just seeing the consistency of it. Consistency testing.
Okay, but if that's the case, that's like day-to-day life that kind of promotes with the idea of capitalism.
Right. So I wouldn't attack it without a.
Yeah, so we shouldn't look down on the idea because it promotes a stupid understanding. Rather, we should still allow it to be considered as fine. Just because an individual can use it just because an idea can take it to their advantage, does not mean we should look down upon it. Because if we're using that logic, then everything can be basically used to that. And then
what about evolution?
So
Instinct, please remain
quiet.
But what about evolution, Tanzia?
What about evolution?
Should we treat evolution as sensible?
Sure, yeah.
Oh, lovely. I wasn't expecting you to say that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't agree with evolution, but it's got nothing to do with this at the moment. It's not going to do anything bad to anyone, so that's
that.
Okay, so what I'm saying is, it's cool. The preface to this maybe is that I am going to I would eventually mention UBI. Relative, I think if you were to compare the two against each other, I feel like the UBI is in many ways a pro-market solution, whereas a UBI is actually more of a pro-socialistic solution. It does a weird kind of deal because it's another name for a UBI. I feel name that I'm pushing it. Let's call it a tax refund for the, because that's what it's going to do in most first world nations. Most first world nations are starting to run fairly high tax brackets. It essentially functions as a great tax refund. All the taxes they pay, here's the money back, and then some. Tax refund with benefits. Because it does that, right? We then get a few other things that then result. These same people can use the money to provide for their own healthcare and education. They can still do that. So we haven't really eliminated the issue of subsidizing these things, but they're now inconsistent, right? So if you were Walmart and you want a consistently healthy population that's capable of working for you, you now have to step in because the government's no longer, right? What's happening instead is the poor are spending money on the things that they find valuable. They're able to actually make that choice for themselves. This gives them economic power, economic participation. If the poor start to spend money on things that they find valuable, they're now making a decision, as opposed to the government taking that money and assigning it and saying that you will find your good health and education value. You will be good workers, essentially. Which, to me personally, I'm a capitalist, so maybe making everyone work is a fine thing to me. But I was wondering, if you're a socialist, is a UBI actually more attractive because it doesn't guarantee good workers?
Not
It
necessarily.
guarantees economic participation.
As I said, not necessarily. And I mean, but you're also like, yeah. I guess I think it's largely like not necessarily. It just depends on implementation. And as I said, like I feel like this is like moving into some kind of like hypothetical and stuff, but I really feel like kind of the problem is like I don't think that just because we have a UBI we shouldn't have those kind of governmental systems.
So I'm saying that
because fundamentally, and even then, so let's just say we have a UBI and we do away with public education and healthcare. Even then, we can't have unregulated midnight. And so I guess this would be like the lefty argument, right? So sure,
right.
we do away with that to allow them to be economic participants, but then we don't allow those markets to be unregulated. We heavily regulate and control them to allow that economic power to actually be relevant and actually be useful, so they aren't priced out.
Yeah. So there's like nuances there. So you could introduce a price ceiling, care and education, right? So that healthcare providers and education providers can't just hijack that, hike up their prices to absurd levels.
You mean like unregulated university loans do?
Yeah, pretty much, right? So you can introduce ceilings, and I think that's really kind of reasonable because I think we can more or less sit around and say like a flu shot shouldn't cost $100,000.
But you understand that's
$2,
but sure. But this is where, and sure, and you can probably agree. This, in a sense, this is like market regulationism is inherently anti laissez-faire capitalism.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Sure.
I think you mean laissez-faire.
Laissez-faire. Yeah. Whatever. I mispronounced it.
Yeah. I'm libertarian, not ANCAPy, so I don't mind.
Yeah. I know. Austrian school is nonsense.
Yeah.
That's something I will posit.
Personally, I don't mind it. But I was just thinking about it because it was interesting. It's inspired by your video in particular. I was thinking about his arguments. I'm like, hang on, I think this actually goes completely in reverse. I actually think that a UBI would be favorable to socialism more than what is essentially the subsidization of most industries.
I think he said the same. I think in ways he actually kind of said similar things, but it was more about being concerned about, and this is what I'm trying to raise, how it's going to be implemented.
Yeah, he did say how, but he raised about like how socialism is about, say, democracy, control, and power. Shoot, I've lost the word. Like UBI, to me, there's something quite special because the poor now participate actively in the economy, right? That's something akin to democracy. It's kind of a good thing, right? They're going out. They're telling the market what they value for
Yeah,
what
see,
can be
this
the
is
first.
this is where I start to have a immediate breakdown and disagreement. It's like this is where so while I think people are rational actors, I guess I don't think that people are necessarily rational with what they spend their money on. I literally don't. And I think that largely the market does as much as it can to make sure you don't. And it makes sure it does as much as you can that you are not an informed consumer. The concept of an informed consumer, the concept of even a rational consumer, not a rational actor, but a rational consumer, is almost a mythos. Like I think it's patently ridiculous.
I agree. And okay, this is bad. This is like at this point I lapse into like hypotheticals, right? But I wonder if the power to participate, would we see markets cater that? Would we see cheaper food, like brackets of services and goods created for the people who are living on just minimum that UBI? Because the businesses still want the money. The profit motive doesn't just cease to be. They're like, hey, these people exist, and they're going to need to buy shelter, food, water, right? We want their money. We're going to compete for that space as well. In most modern societies, this kind of lower quarter of the market is actually bigger than the upper quarter of the market. Not in terms of spending, not in terms of their ability to buy Rolexes per person, but in terms of the collective wealth of the poor. As weird as that sounds, like collective money held by the poor in a UBI scenario can actually be far bigger than the people at the top. And maybe we'll see markets cater that by being less
What you're
focused
saying is
on
they have
luxury
far
goods.
You're saying they have far more spending power, which I can kind of see,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Although the point is,
UBI
it's like
so it's
but then like once again, I don't assume. Yeah, so there are companies that may cater to this. However, I don't think that necessarily will be the case. I guess like I don't consider like I don't know, and this also considers companies to kind of be like rational providers in the response to rational consumers, right? Which, I mean, I could pull out individual examples, but like it's hard to say because I think this is a really hard thing to measure. But I think there are plenty of cases in which companies don't do this. I mean, I've got the most meme example from last year was the Blizzard thing where don't you have phones? Don't you guys own phones? Do you know that one? Where they released the new Diablo thing, that they announced the new Diablo thing, and they're like, and when the crowd like express its dislike as consumers, as the primary body of their consumers, went, we don't want this. Their response was, well, don't you guys own phones?
Their response is
it's literally
I think that
an example of they have no interest in catering to their consumer.
Yeah, I think that depends on the industry. So the weird thing that I think maybe people aren't realizing is a lot of what we experience in the middle to upper class, and people, pretty much everyone in Discord is strictly kind of middle classy or higher. Most of the things you're thinking about are luxury stuff.
Yes.
Video games are strictly speaking luxury.
Yeah, no, I know. As I said, it was
Blizzard doesn't feel. I don't think they care really. Activision Blizzard's hit points are like we're making enough money, and what we're providing is a luxury. Like that, they're not in danger of happening. Whereas if you're in the business of providing like food, right, and then some other guy comes along and actually provides food for cheaper, you're in a bit of danger because it's a necessity, and people are more rational about necessities than they are about
somewhat. But even with food, right? Like you see, this was food. I mean, it's yes and no. I guess a good example of this locally is the we got Aldi later than the eastern states, so it's been more a recent example over here. But Aldi's in the last few years finally hit WA. Well, we're so far behind.
Damn,
it's ridiculous the resistance I encounter that people have to Aldi. Their products are fine. Their food's cheap.
Yeah.
In some ways, their products are even superior. But it's the perception that they aren't Woolworths and Coles. It's the perception that they're different, and it's the perception that they're off-brand goods. Oh, and I can't buy those.
Yeah.
People these are necessities. Food is necessities. You can literally save like, and we've done the maths. We save like $50 a week going between there and like another a local WA chain.
For
Between
me,
these two things, we save money, and that's a rational thing that we're doing. However, most people are not.
Yep. It was this kind of argument of mine when I was talking to an economist friend of mine, and it was based off a single line I had, and saying the point of a UBI is to increase, is to get so many more minds participating in the market. So what will happen is that right now we have the market and its participants be middle to wealthy people. And the nature of that is that we innovate in the weirdest things. Like sometimes, okay, it's kind of cute, but sometimes you look at it and you feel a bit sad. We innovate on smartphones. We innovate on kind of
We
a lot
don't.
of.
We pretend we do.
You know what I mean? Like that's
I know what you
still
mean.
a direction of
I
industry.
take a shot at that. But
it's still a direction of industry. Like it's something that a lot of money and advertising is poured into. Like smartphones.
I'm gonna regress the argument a bit.
Sure.
I'm going to jump back to healthcare for a second.
Yeah.
There is another primary reason that we want I mean, you could argue this isn't related, but I feel like it's a very interconnected system. So even though you can have state-funded research, I mean, you should know a bit about this, Mr. Medical Degree. The vast majority of medical advances come out of the public sector, not the private.
Oh, sure. I meant to say universal healthcare provision. Not R&D is like something I keep separate. I think in public research.
I don't think they're somewhat interlinked.
So one of the things that comes to mind for me is like on the ground with universal healthcare and education. We have
even with the education, right?
The class that uses the socioeconomic class that uses this the most actually tends to be the middle to upper. The lowest, they don't seem to even be aware that healthcare exists. Like it's free. Like you get the.
No, I'm not sure I've seen any good stats on that. Like from my understanding, like I mean, I live in a moderately lower socioeconomic area, and things like the super clinics that were built over here are heavily utilized.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah, no. I mean, I don't have any papers with me, but you get underutilization of health services by the lowest quintile. And it's just like they don't use it as much. Every other quintile benefits from universal healthcare, but it's not
but then even then we have to look at why. It might be that they're simply not going to the doctors for smaller amounts of things. It might be that that people who are more wealthy are more prone, for cultural or societal reasons, are more prone to I've got a cold, I better go to the doctors. Where someone that's poor is like, it's just a fucking cold.
In Australia,
I could literally write it off as something like that.
In Australia, we have a unique phenomenon. I don't know how much it applies out here. We have something really weird happen. Our lower socioeconomic classes, and indigenous people in particular, tend to have a more stoic attitude. They fall sick, they have this deal with it attitude, so they don't go to healthcare.
So you basically just agreed with my supposition.
Yeah, and what happens is we have money poured into universal healthcare, but these people won't draw it. At the same time, we have
they are using it though, right? But it is being accessed. It's just not being accessed to maybe a high degree. But in a sense, that's fine. That just means it isn't costing as much then.
It still costs. So what we have in parallel with that, since healthcare is universal in here, right? It doesn't care. It doesn't really matter what your income bracket is. In parallel, we have this phenomenon of, well, the poorest can be very stoic, and they have that kind of, it's almost like a cultural stereotype, and they actually have it. It's only them.
Yeah, but the point is,
you're middle to the worried well. So they're completely well, but they check in a lot, right? So they get a lot of money used to treat relatively minor conditions in the kind of your middle class, and not much money is really just reaching the poor people.
Look, I can understand your point.
Allocation.
I can understand your point, but I would just reduce it to a singular. I would reduce it to a singular thing. It needs to be accessible for when people do need it, and it needs to be affordably accessible for when those people do need it.
Yeah, For me,
And so I did that. So there's 2 points there. The first point is, if they're not using it that much, that's fine. I want it to be there. And even if you move to a UBI, then it still needs to be affordable.
right? Yeah, ceilings are important.
Yeah,
when a
and that's
UBI
it. Like,
gets
to me, and almost anything else is kind of superfluous to me. We can argue over the most efficient ways to do it and the most efficient ways to implement those things, but that is my base kind of axiomatic principle on this. And that's what I'm going to base everything on.
Fair enough. There's another category of people that
You can attack that if you want, but yeah.
No, it's fine. There's a category of people that also kind of bother me, and it's the poor but healthy. So what happens is the government kind of collects taxation, and we try to help the poor, right? And what part of what we do to help, we do actually have welfare payments, but it's a zero-sum game, kind of like only so much. They can only pay out as much when they receive, or they can go into a deficit. But there's a kind of limitation on the amount of money being paid out. Particularly when we see liberal governments come in, they start cutting because they feel like it. With limited income streams, what happens is if you get someone who's poor but healthy, they're actually going to get less. And kind of forgotten. So our goal here is to help the poor.
Yeah,
right?
but sure,
but
that's also because they don't need it. So they're getting less because they don't. So they're not getting less. They're just, in a sense, it's about bringing people to a point of equitability, right? So that person is like, let's just say, like on a scale of 1 to 10, like they're at a 3, and when they're sick, they're at a 2. And so they're getting what they need to bring them back to that 3, that minimum level of equitability in society. So it's not about they're not getting. It's about they don't require it. So why would we give people what they do not require?
And I agree. And I realize that what I'm doing is I'm shifting some of the values. So I don't know it's actually about equitability. I think that it's more closer to there's human dignity. So what I'm looking at is more human dignity than equity. And it changes it a little bit. So I say that
so I'm far more interested in equitability.
Yeah, no, by all means.
Than an abstract. See, to me, it's something like human dignity is very personal and abstract.
Oh, no. By all means, I'm going to give hard numbers. So, in Australia, we don't, when it comes to, we do this without PBS. Their drugs will never hit approval because they cost too much. The reason is, even though it would be equitable to help people with $1 million drugs, like, it'd be bringing them up to the same levels as everyone, it'd be too costly. There's actually a limit to how much human life is worth.
Yeah, so there is a functional pragmatism. I understand. I'm not willing to ignore reality.
No, I'm extending that a little. So I'm saying, what if we do something like a UBI instead of healthcare? So what we're doing is, again, we have to cap costs, and I think you kind of do that both ways anyway. So cost capped, so that's not going to be an issue here. What I'll do is I'd walk to someone and say, "You're human. Here's how much money we're going to give you. Like, this is just, we're not going to ask questions. You get this money, right? You put it to all the things you're going to put it to." Whereas the other scenario, with the problem with equities, we kind of live uncalculated how much we should be giving everyone, right? So in a single year, some people might receive the value of, say, $1 million of treatment. Like, one person might receive $1 million of investment by the government. Another person might receive none. And it seems odd that we do that. Maybe we should kind of split this kind of more evenly and have that each person gets $500,000 as opposed to this person gets $1 million in treatment. This person gets.
But this is the point. It's about what people. And I guess you've kind of hit a point where you just made me realize something, right? So things like UBI and sickness, it makes sense for like GP visits, right? So assuming there's caps and I need to go visit a GP, it's not that like I could probably afford to see a GP and buy some antibiotics or whatever, right? That could be affordable. However, what I might not be able to afford, and not what I can't afford, my mouse is doing weird things, is to pay for my own treatment of an aggressive form of cancer that I just happen to have.
But
here's the thing. That's why we have those systems. Because
let's deal with the better one though. What about psych? Right? What about psychological help? Everybody needs a bit of that.
No, I'm on board with this. I want far more government-funded psychological and
Yeah.
psychiatric care.
So what I'm saying is this, right?
I reckon.
There's a finite amount of money. It's being channeled in to a government, right? We can't just expand it, and we got to spend it wisely. In one scheme, you're kind of bringing everyone up to the same level, right? What that's going to mean is you're going to oddly. Well, I mean, you're distributing it to just bring everyone to the same level. So some poor people, receive welfare levels that would see other people being skyrocketed into the middle class. And we consider this acceptable, but should we? Because say there's cost $1 million to treat cancer, right? With the same $1 million, you could help 100 homeless people kind of be skyrocketed all the way out into good dwellings.
I understand the utilitarian argument here.
Yeah, so
I reject it out of hand.
You reject out of hand, but
I reject it.
Is that
yes.
a good thing? Bad thing? Why?
According to my principles, no, because I believe we can hit a point of equitability, and while there is limited money, I think there are inefficiencies, and there's more economic stuff we can address. This is kind of goes into a wider economic argument,
right? So I mean,
but as a bit of a meme, how about we don't buy fucking F-35s that don't work?
Right. So I'm saying
that'll pay for a few surgeries.
Right. So I agree with you. By all means, there's money to be found elsewhere.
How many though?
Assuming that nothing else changes in society, because
I know, didn't they cost 35 billion?
Yeah, they cost a shit ton. They cost a lot.
I'm pretty sure 35 billion will pay for more than a few fucking surgeries.
No, you're right. Government expenditures, is unwise. But
I don't think it's unwise.
I
don't think government expenditure is unwise. I think mistakes are made, but I don't think all government expenditure is automatically unwise. I think that
the F-35 was.
Yeah, no, the F-35s was unwise, but we can. No, but that was unwise. But we have a lot of problems with actually military expenditure, and not just because of how much we necessarily spend on the military. It's because of how inefficiently we spend on the military. I've talked to some people about this, and it's about the way we're actually, and this is actually kind of like an international political problem where we're often pressured by other governments to spend money on things we don't want to spend on. And an example is actually our Jeeps, right? Like the standard travel car we picked for
Julius, I kind of understand the argument, but I didn't want to go there. I'm saying
but I'm just like, we were pressured by the British government to buy like the Jaguar, these kind of Jaguar Land Rover things, which don't work versus what the German want. The German ones were designed to work in that climate. The British ones weren't, and we bought the fucking British Indian ones. They shit. Because we were politically pressured. All the tests suggested to buy the German ones, and then they turned around and bought the British ones because the British government went, please do this to support this company.
Woo! Commonwealth!
So, I'm just kind of putting on a kind of all else equal kind of that I'm doing. So I'm trying to eliminate those, because you're right. There's money to be found elsewhere. But I mean, even that's not right. Even when you do find the extra, you find an extra $50 billion, right?
Yeah.
How do we distribute it? Do we still distribute it as is equitable, or should we just hand it out evenly to all the poor people? I think we should distribute it evenly to all.
I disagree. I think that creates a more inequitable system.
To me,
I don't think just giving money to people solves problems.
No, I don't think it does. Though they're both kind of. Oh well. I'll put a pin in that one and come to it later.
Sure.
I mean, what's happening is that people are fundamentally equal. Some people might have been born with accidents happen, but they're accidents, right? They don't make you more or less worth than a human being. And yet money is an investment. Money exemplifies value. So when we pump $1 million in that person, we're saying that person is worth $1 million. But when we do that and we say we're not going to do that,
I actually don't think it's about the worth. The point is that we say that as a society we are willing to spend. There is probably upper limits to this as a matter of pragmatism, but we're willing to spend large amounts of money to keep people alive when possible. Also, side note about actually saving money, as I'm sure you know, Mr. Medical Nerd, one of the largest medical costs in almost any people's lives is in the final days of palliative care. And if we actually would legalize euthanasia, euthanasia, that would save a lot of fucking money
Yeah,
in the medical system.
I'm leaving all that aside. I
Was that
agree.
leaving? Sorry,
Um,
just another thought.
No,
But yeah,
I agree.
I guess the point is that
Healthcare
like
costs.
it's
Um,
honestly to point, like I think it's I just don't want to treat it as a matter of finance. Ultimately, like while I will
It's not a matter of
acknowledge
finance.
a
Like I
pragmatic
said, the
upper
reason
limit, I'm not.
it's
Just
not.
because I'm willing to spend $1 million on a person does not mean I'm saying you're worth $1 million. It means that I am willing to
Money.
try and keep you alive.
It's see. I think that money is worth, but that's me being capitalistic. So
Yeah,
you pay a
I don't.
CEO $1 million. I'm not saying he's actually worth. We're just saying he's worth a lot, right?
He's not
But we
worth
don't pay
$1 million.
everyone. We're not saying he's worth $1 million. I'm not saying that. We're just saying he's worth a lot. But how much he's actually worth, that's up for debate. But we are roughly saying that he's worth more than some other people. I'm not sure if you should.
Yeah,
But
this is the
that's what we're
problem
doing.
is that we're starting.
But
We've hit points where we're incredibly divergent on principle, so we can't really
yeah,
agree on any
that's
suppositions.
oh, that's fine. That's fine. I'm just playing with the ideas. So what I'm saying is, for me, it's not really economics. It's not really what I'm thinking about. I'm saying that at birth, we're all just human, right? So and
Largely.
my sense of UBI just reflects that. It's like a
Sure.
government collects money and then it just distributes it because we're all just human at the end of the day. Like
I guess it
start
comes into
beginning
question.
end, we're all just human.
If I was going to try and be reductionist, or perhaps arguing that would be more efficient, I don't necessarily think that is the case.
Oh, I don't think it'd be more efficient. Not necessarily. Certainly, that's one of the best arguments to UBI. UBI is inefficient.
Inefficient.
I don't think it changes. Yeah, it's inefficient. I mean, look, if you had $10 million to deliver healthcare to Australia, right? You're best off writing a list of the top 1,000 people to treat and just treat those people, right? Narrow your list down, because if you go and hand out $10 million to everyone, you're not handing them much money at all, right? Anytime you're kind of cost limited like this, UBI is not going to really. It's not going to. It depends on the kind of endpoint that you're looking for. I would say that like universal healthcare is far more targeted. It is far more kind of return on interest. That's why I think of it as a very pro-market, pro-capitalist kind of solution. It's very kind of smart capitalist engineering.
I think I don't
It
think
takes a.
I don't think it was necessarily engineered by capitalism, and I think it is. Yeah, I mean, it depends. Even then, so you could say what you could say is that it supports certain economic schools of thought, right? Because there are many economic schools that would argue against it, but perhaps it's like it's been engineered, or it's more fits in line with like Keynesian engineering of systems, right?
I would say it's mainstream economics.
But,
I mean, you can have unusual.
well, I'd say that's I'd say that you'd have to say even Keynesianism, like full Keynesianism, is quite lefty, but yeah.
I mean mainstreamy. So what happens is it takes it's just the efficient allocation of taxation towards particular goals, right? I think universal UBI is the most inefficient allocation when you think of it this way, because it doesn't target any goals. It is the most blind thing. Yeah.
In the way that we spoke about UBI, you can see I'm actually speaking against it.
Yeah.
If it would be currently instituted the way you described, it is not something I would want, and I think it would be to the detriment of society.
Yeah. So UBI is extremely blind. It's blind welfare. It doesn't.
Yeah, I don't like that concept.
It just delivers. But I do think that human beings are fundamentally equal, and that's why I push for UBI. It's actually almost like a somewhat moral ground. It's like, you're all equal. So
I guess they push back for on the same grounds.
I know, unusual, right? Same kind of value being used differently. But I say to people, like, when you're born with an illness, you develop an illness, those are accidental things. You're not really obliged to treatment. It's an accident of birth. You're born with this skin color, that skin color,
okay,
this,
so
all accidental.
I wouldn't argue that you're inalienably obliged to treatment, but because that's a silly position to take. What I am going to say is that as a society, we have, I don't know, this thing called fucking empathy, and we decide that, do you know what? We are people that could also, at any point of our lives, we could also be in this position. So we choose to help you. because we would
Yes,
want that
but
to be happen to ourselves.
empathy
That's what we
bothers me
assign.
because empathy bothers me because it does some weird things. Like it
Empathy
does lots of
bothers.
good things. Yeah, it does. Because you get situations where
Yeah, fuck empathy, bro. Other people are fucking idiots. Got him.
no, empathy can be destructive. Empathy can be
No,
fatal.
it
No,
can
for
be.
sure,
be-
for sure.
No, okay,
I'm
so
just memeing.
sure.
Yeah.
So can anything in the extreme, but I don't
Yeah,
think
I've
this is
seen-
an extreme example of empathy.
So I think so I would say what happens here is something like you got silent victims. So when you do take that $1 million and you do treat that one guy who has some expensive condition, everyone forgets the opportunity cost of doing so. You know, the large number of people that could have been helped to that money, and probably you're looking at many humans, and that's the trouble here. Like,
Can I
you could have
interject
lifted.
here with something?
Yeah, go ahead.
So just look of this from a refugee standpoint, right? You
Oh
can
my God.
help 50 to 60 times more on place than you can do in your own country. It doesn't help your country, it doesn't help the refugees, and doesn't help the all over good. Now, of course, since they are here or they're shown on TV, people show empathy and they bring them in, but they're actually causing suffering for others because resources are diverted to these people having the same standard as, for example, us in Sweden, instead of us giving much higher standard and
Can we just
education to
not
other people.
argue ethno-nationalism?
What?
I'm
I'm not
okay.
interested in arguing
No,
ethno-nationalism.
I'm happy.
But that's not what I did.
happy. Yeah, no, I don't think that's necessarily it.
I don't know.
But-
I just with the second someone brings up refugees at this point, it's almost like
Yeah.
it's just fucking warning signs for ethno-nat.
Yeah,
I'm
but it's an
happy to
example.
entertain the idea. It kind of makes sense. So if you're thinking about the allocation of money, and I think it's like a little bit of, I think there's a twist that I can add that makes it better, right? So in Australia, and I believe this is the same case pretty much all over the world, First World nations take in refugees. They do, right? But that's kind of
Well,
that's kind
you see,
of,
yeah,
that's
I've
the
actually
high
got an
point.
argument against this, by the way.
Wait, I was gonna go somewhere anyway. That's the high point. We don't insert them into our most wealthy suburbs. We don't insert them into good jobs. We don't insert them into good education. We don't give them opportunity. We give them quite a lot of misery. I mean, it's still better than where they
Okay, so,
came from,
like,
but we don't
there's
do
an
them
entire argument
right.
that's been missed, though.
Right?
Like
So I've
we've skipped
watched.
the premise of why refugees. See, this is why I didn't want to argue this. Why are refugees in the first place?
They're leaving a horrible situation, but
Yes,
we're
and
trying to fortify the
like, so,
nemesis.
for example, like let's look at specifically the Syrian refugee crisis. Why did the Syrian refugees leave the camps that they were in at the time? Why did they decide to do that?
Right.
Does anyone know?
So I would say if all the world's nations were to like not take in refugees, but were to focus that level of money and kind of more, they really would have just matched their commitments and put in that much wealth, right? They could uplift entire nations. Nations like Syria would never even hit the point of.
You're dodging the question, dude.
Yeah,
But,
no,
okay, wait,
all right.
sorry.
I'm friends with
Why
them.
did they leave? Look, you're right. So why did
No,
they
no,
leave
but, like-
Syria? Because it became
No,
a
it wasn't
hot
because it
place
was
to
a war situation, right? It literally wasn't because they left Syria, but they were mostly in refugee camps in like Turkey, Lebanon, and surrounding nations, right?
Yeah.
They were in well provisioned, like air conditioned tents, food, water, and they weren't moving for the first X amount of months of the Syrian crisis, right? They were not.
Yeah.
What happened was, as an international community, we did not give those refugee camps enough money. They ran out of money, and those people had a choice of starving and dying or leaving and trying to immigrate and applying a and so this actually goes into your argument.
Wait a second. Can I interject with something very interesting here, right? So you're talking about these refugees that are fleeing for their lives. You're saying that they are under the threat of death, correct?
They literally have no choice other than to leave.
Okay, so that's granted. Now, can you then answer me why, for example, in Portugal they are asking for more refugees, but nobody wants to go there?
This is completely tangential to my argument. My point is that they never would have left in the first place.
No, it's not.
No. My point was they never would have left in the first place. Correct?
Yep.
I'm
So,
not arguing that the
Julius-
refugees are rational actors. I'm not arguing that they're great, like they're amazing people or anything. I'm saying that they mostly would not have left because most people don't want to do. Most people don't go like, I'm going to just crazy. Like vast populations don't just suddenly migrate for no reason. This doesn't happen in history. Like this always happens. It's always triggered by a reason. If we look at it throughout history.
So I would say what's happened there is the world isn't filled with people like Lemasif. If there were more people like Lemasif, right, those camps would
The
stay
more
funded,
people-
theoretically, right? They didn't.
Well, actually, no. It would also actually work if we actually funded, if governments actually funded the International Monetary Fund properly as well. And
I
you
think
can
they
actually see
should.
us doing. You can see Australia doing this with international aid as well. Where do we actually put most of our international aid? Because I'm also will actually argue for a locality system. I don't necessarily want to help everyone globally all the time. You need to start from yourself and move out. I think this is just a pragmatic point. However, we put most of our foreign aid into East Timor, Papua New Guinea, and Indonesia.
Yep, it makes sense.
Because they're our closest neighbors.
Yeah, so I'm personally kind of. I have
can I just ask? Could you give me a source on that? We stopped funding, so they were starving in their camps. Could you give me some source on that? I just can't find it myself.
Talk to you.
What?
I don't want to.
You don't want to talk to me, but you're stating something. I'm just
because I'm talking to Midnight. I'm not interested in talking to you. I'll supply the source to Midnight, and if he chooses to, he will at some point supply the source to you.
Okay.
But I have no interest in talking to you.
So you're being dishonest. Got it.
So I'm
Yep.
Okay. Like I feel like if a nation wants to take an anti-refugee, that's fine. They just have to be aware that what is required as effective action against refugees is funding the IMF, funding good quality camps in those nations, and applying all this kind of political messy stuff like trade restrictions, applying pressures to bad regimes, all this kind of stuff has to happen in order to prevent refugee migration. It's all the stuff that people don't like to. It just needs to be done.
See, imagine that in counterintuitive things. Like this is a bit of a tautology, but counterintuitive things are counterintuitive. Sometimes what is best is the best option isn't necessarily what people would like to do. Isn't necessarily what's optimal.
Yeah. So I mean, well, people want the refugees out, and they talk about. I find it like there's a mismatch. It's not even what people. It's not that people aren't smart enough. People are mismatched. So they say, "I don't want refugees. I'm willing to fund them in their own nations." Promise, they just don't. They don't vote for the politicians that do these things, right? They don't make it a priority. Then they get surprised that it's not made a priority. And that's disappointing.
Right? Don't know about you, but I don't vote Pauline Hanson.
Hey, I'm okay if there's people in Australia who I don't like refugees. I want to vote. I want to find a candidate that gets really, really involved internationally, helps these nations become a better place so that we don't get any future refugee crisis. I'm like, hey, you want to be isolationist like that? That sounds amazing.
Well, yeah, then you definitely want to vote Labour Greens because they're the only parties that are actually advocating for these policies, Midnight.
Yep. And I've said that before. I've said that to a few people. Really want to keep the refugees out? I'll tell you which party to vote. And it isn't one nation.
Midnight. How do you approach like the issue with some parts of the country? They have a bit of a corrupt DNA due to inbreeding.
Which country? Sorry.
Well, through Middle East and Northern Africa, it's been I can't say that consanguinity, whatever it's called, like marrying your second cousin, first cousin, whatever.
Yeah.
And that has led to that among 30 to 40% are considered inbred. Now, in Saudi Arabia, it could be up to 80% in some places, right?
I have an answer, and I'm gonna tell you a story that's a bit of a twist. So we do exactly what we do with cats. You let them mix. Globalism. Let people move from country to country, blend ethnic mixes together. The only way you solve inbreeding is by introducing genetic material. So, the Middle East has real issues with inbreeding.
Would that not mean that you would? Wouldn't that mean that you would go against their culture and religious values?
Don't force them. You can't force people to have kids anymore.
He wasn't saying to force. All he said is this. You asked a biological question, and he gave you a biological answer.
Yeah.
Well, I know the solution. You could eradicate them or mix them up. I know that. That's not what I asked.
There's an answer to your question, right? So you're right. They might not be inclined because of the culture such. So what we have to do is we have to be inviting, open. We have to be open to the idea of mixed race relationships, right? We need to bring some over, move there, kind of deal. We need to.
I understand.
Everyone's gonna hate this, but it's open borders. Like, the more we need to intermingle, and that's the intermingling is what prevents inbreeding. It's not the only nation with inbreeding issues, by the way. You see inbreeding even you see it in royalty. There are royal lines that have reached really high levels to a point
I know.
dying
I
of it.
That's the same thing.
The most famous example, I think, not the most famous, but actually like a more close to home example for me is like blue eyes and red hair as a result of inbreeding. I don't have red hair, but I know.
Yeah.
Blue eyes and red hair, like from the British Isles, are both results of inbreeding.
The irony of all this for me is Godwin's law. Strictly speaking, this is how you use Darwinian theory correctly, silly Nazis. It's not about making your stock as pure as possible. It's actually about mixing it. Pure stock bad, inbreeding bad. You actually want mixtures. You want to blur these lines. They did such a bad job of biology.
Well, I mean, in a sense, but it's obvious that we can get different traits from more specified breeding, right?
More what breeding?
Well, as we can see with, for example, canines or for example, so
canines, yes. Shall we look at how many cancerous breeds there are of canines and how absolutely fucked they are into the ground because of these interbreeding programs?
I agree with that.
Pure breeding programs.
But I didn't make a value. I said that it's possible.
Okay. Yeah, and it's usually largely negative.
Yeah. So
no, I wouldn't say it's hugely negative. I think that
it's largely negative.
Yeah, but I would say that that's only when it comes to instead of having a purpose of the animal, you want
it's largely negative to the health of the breed itself.
There's a reason I raised cats and not dogs. So cat breeding is fascinating because cats reach really high levels of purity, sometimes higher than that of dogs. And so what cat breeders sometimes do is actually adopt a stray cat. Reason is that they don't want to actually selectively breed. They've done too much selective breeding, and they need to introduce just chaos, genetic chaos, pure and simple, right? With human beings, we don't need to pick up strays. We can just let immigration happen. And mixed cultures a bit. But really the best solution here is you don't need to run in there and do anything. We just need to engage with their media and culture. They accept us, we accept them, you'll see relationships spring up, right? There'll be American-Iranian, Iranian-American, so on. That'll just naturally kind of happen. We don't need to do anything big.
Over what time period are we talking about?
Time period? They already exist. You already get Middle Eastern American people. It's already kind of happening anyway. But if you really if this is a big issue, it just comes down to kind of making people not hate each other based on ethnicity so much. Yes. Right? Ethnicity is maybe a bit too broad in that. You want to hate specific people, but just because that guy is dark skin doesn't make him a bad person.
No, that's very well true. I didn't say that, right? So I don't mind. For me, integration or immigration should be it should work well for your country and your culture, and it should be a trickle down effect, hopefully, where you can reinvest in poorer countries.
Yeah.
Which is really weird that people are not doing that. I mean, if we really want to give good aid, we should start with our infrastructure on a lower level, so we can hire people that can actually start investing themselves in their neighborhood and stuff like that, and that's starting.
Yeah, sure.
That's not what's happening. So
yeah, it's kind of really interesting to me. I feel like a lot of nationalist and conservative talking points, you look at them, a lot of them actually lean into progressive socialist talking points. We realize that the best way for your nation to progress is progressive stuff, and it's kind of weird. Cool. Happens.
As far as I know, there's two things that really excel when it comes to progress, like technical progress and stuff like that. And I can't remember the first one, but the second one is trade, at least. That's probably one of the most important things. What was the second?
So
but it didn't seem like it was immigration that was that important. But trade and something else, just so important for a country to progress. I guess it's some sort of contact, right?
It's culture and technology, right? You want to gain something from the other nations. It's not just their tech; it's also their culture. You want to take the lessons you can, ignore the rubbish. Every culture has its rubbish, but hey, there's lessons to be learned. Take those and take the tech while you're there.
I had a discussion about this with culture, and what I came is this: the culture is so fluid that it doesn't really matter. Because at points people want to be more liberal, and then they want to be more conservative. It's always going to be interchanging because the grass is always greener on the other side, right?
Sure.
So in that sense, the only thing I think culture, what you should strive for, is have good ethics for the group, and I mean the group as a whole, not certain individuals. That's the only thing you could strive for a good culture, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't have much to say about it, but yeah. So to your inbreeding problems, the solution is the introduction of new genetic material. You can't do it directly. I'm not saying pick up some Americans and send them to the Middle East, but you can kind of encourage it just a little. You just blend the cultures a little bit more. And
I have to remind that this
isn't
a Muslim thing, by the way. This is more of a cultural thing in these areas, right?
Oh, absolutely. It works in reverse, by the way. I think that maybe I'm just motivated to say this, but I think Western nations have gained quite a lot from bringing in people and mixed race relationships and so on. I am a mixed race person myself, so consider myself motivated. But I think that your first nations have gained.
I think the problem is when you have a guilt versus shame culture. It's just too. If you know what that is.
Vaguely.
Have you heard the concept of it?
I feel I've heard that, and I nearly always.
No, I can be wrong which, but I do believe that guild culture is basically that you align yourself more to the group of the entire nation or the area or whatever. Well, a shame culture is more interested in its own, more tribal, like family and relatives and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
And the idea is that, for example, social democrats, like in Sweden or Scandinavia, it works with a guild culture, but it does not work with a shame culture.
Oh, that's some reading for me.
So the idea is, for example, in a guild culture, you wouldn't go to the doctor if you just had the sniffles, right? You would, because you would take up valuable time, and this is kind of how it was in Scandinavia before, right? Which is why you could have universal healthcare, because not everyone would just walk in there and say, like, yeah, I have the sniffles, give me medicine. They would take up, valuable time and resources, or basically behave in the best interest of the group, and that's what would be the culture as well. So if a person from a shame culture comes, unless someone shames them, which doesn't happen in a guild culture because everyone is more like you will align to the group. But if you're from a shame culture, you need to be told that you're misbehaving, right? They can't just look at you like, oh, you're doing something bad. So what happens is, for example, now in that sense, like, oh, why shouldn't I go to the doctor when I have the sniffles? It's free, right? It's free, right? It's free, right?
Here's the thing, Universal. The problem with that is the government stepped in to when monopolies actually formed. There have been no media monopolies that have been started. You have to go and look at examples of media monopolies that have started up in the past. Look at what caused them and look at what fixed them.
Well, I would say
because there are monopolies in the past which have happened, and the only reason that these monopolies do not have as much power is because they were creating so much problems and so much inequality for the country that the government stepped in and then.
I think it was Johnson or Nixon destroyed the black family by producing the greater social policies and basically encouraged them to go on welfare and all this sort of thing, and that's why you have the ghettos today, practically.
No, it's because of redlining. It's because of intentional discrimination against other people.
Well, like, it's at the end of the day,
Nixon's administration made redlining more of a thing. You realize that. Like Nick says,
The question is, I think that the idea of beginnings and ends are sort of like constructions that we come up with to explain the world, right? I don't think that the world has a beginning or an end personally. And I think that the idea that it does is, again, just one of those things where humans go, look, shit has, like, we can say that shit begins and ends, so maybe all shit begins and ends. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There was a quote by Seneca. He said,